Okay, so to continue, the first part of it's not going to be recorded for those people who are not attending the class today, but it doesn't really matter. You guys are here. You guys are the ones that are important to know this stuff. So let's see. I'm going through the examples from lecture number 6. What we're looking at then, I showed you. Oops, it looks like we got. Okay, yeah. So I was going to say it looked like the slide set moved ahead a little bit. So we were looking at the concept of putting in images. So if we put in images here, we see the image source and with the image itself, a height and a width, and this turns into the clickable links as we've seen here. So we click on the image that's entitled links and it brings the user to the page over here on the right, and the page over here on the right is going to have those hyperlinks that we're interested in going to. So using an image as an anchor works exactly the same way as using text, but we have a picture of the images over here. So it accomplishes the same kind of task as using regular old text, but it gives us a little bit fancier kind of look and feel. So we can put any images there, images of buttons, images of pictures, and we can create kind of a dynamic memory with that. In fact, if you remember last week's lecture, if we roll the mouse over, we can change the image, which comes in handy for those interesting menus where we hover the mouse over and it says, I know, click here or something, or the image itself changes. Also used with image maps, as we saw, as well. We covered image maps, I believe, last week. So here's another example with a horizontal rule in here. So what do we have here? We have the horizontal rule element that renders a horizontal rule, R, a horizontal rule. And remembering this little tag here, because this is XHTML compliant, we can essentially have an opening and closing tag all in a closing tag. So this is really the closing tag syntax. So special characters here are denoted with this ampersand. So for spaces, and this is a non-breaking, or this is, excuse me, a space. This one here is a @ symbol for copyright. So we can use this ampersand symbol as abbreviation for a character. In this case, the special characters are an ampersand. Oops, I'm sorry, this is an ampersand, not a space. Because I was like reading, when I was saying that, I'm like, oh, that's totally wrong. An ampersand, which is the and symbol, and then which is an and, so this is the ampersand actually. And this is the copyright symbol. We have one for non-breaking space. It's NS, non-NB, NBSP or something, a non-breaking space. Which gives us a space, because remember we can't just put a space in, we actually have to put the symbol in there and put the code for a space, which is a special character. So in here we have our special characters that are assembled, that are notified here. So the special characters here are entered into the code using the ampersand code syntax. You're not going to remember all of these, you're going to look them up when you need to use them, and that's going to give you what you need to use in order to figure out how you're going to get the desired effect. And here's the output for it. So the text placed between the delete tags, and if we take a look at the previous slide, we see that there's a delete tag in here. Where is the delete tag? Here it is down here actually. On the bottom of the screen we have DEL. Doesn't really delete it, gives us that deleted look. So it crosses the text out for us. So if we were going to show an edit to a particular document, we could use this one to emphasize the point that this line is going to be deleted. And then we have a superscript and a subscript as well that we're using in here. So we have a super 2, so it's going to raise the 2 up. Here it's going to have inside of the super 2, inside of the text that's surrounding it, we're going to use the DEL tag here to delete to give us that special effect. And then we're also using a subscript in it as well. So here's the text, the line dash through it. In fact, we even get the line dash through the subs and the supers as well if it's in between. So everything that's in between, in fact, you can see here, this subscript, excuse me, superscript with a 2 has the line through it as well. So we have this nice little kind of formatted thing going on. We have the copyright symbol here. This is how you're getting the copyright symbol actually. And then the ampersand here. So we see the ampersand here with the copy symbol here. So we can know that if we put in an ampersand, it's not going to show because it's a special character. So we have to actually put the ampersand in there along with AMP next to it in order to get it. And the other thing I forgot to note on this as well is that there's a semicolon that goes at the end of it. So See that we have a semicolon here. So it's actually kind of weird. Because you're putting a code in here, and then you're putting a semicolon at the end of it. And what you're trying to do essentially is say this is a special character. Here we have the same thing with the copy with the semicolon at the end of it as well. So, all right. So let's see what we have going on here. So here's the other example here with the links. So we can apply the same example we looked at earlier with the hypertext links, and then here we have the text that's associated with it. And here we're using an unordered list, and so the entries are unordered list. This is the example of the unordered list. We have an opening tag with the unordered list. Then we have a list item, and the list item is going to be one of our hyperlinks. Another list item, another list item. And so then we have the closing unordered list to end our list. And then we have an entry here. So the list item with a / list item. This is an opening and a closing tag. So this is why the ampersand, why the / is appearing before the tag. When it's an empty closing tag, you'll see the ampersand after. So you'll see like BR space / and that would be the opening and the closing tag all together, instead of just a closing or an opening being used. Alright, here's the output where we have an unordered list, and the unordered list is going to give us bullets. If we don't want the bullets, we can change the character that's being used on the unordered list, and it's a property that we're setting. After the UL, then we set the bullet character would be something like check marks or squares or dots or something, depending upon what we desire to show up on the screen. So each entry in the list is rendered on its own with a bullet before it. So here we have an unordered list again. By inserting a list here, we're going to put a list item inside of it, and then we're going to put an unordered list inside of the unordered list. So we have indentation that goes inside of the indentation as an effect that this is going to accomplish. And then the entries on the unordered list are placed between the, here's we have the ordered list. So we have an ordered list also inside of the unordered list. So it's basically showing you some interesting nesting of unordered lists and ordered lists. And here we have another ordered list here. So the type attribute of the ordered list element allows you to enter in a sequence type to order the list. And here we have the ordered list type is equal to A, because by default it's numbers. And remember before I said, well, we want to change the type. Here we have, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Type is equal to A. Okay. Well, that means essentially that we're going to use ABC. If we did capital A, it would be capital ABC, which is interesting. So we can change the type character, and that way we can actually change, and let me go back to this one here. I believe we're leaving the type as the default here. Nope, here we have type. Here we're specifying Roman numerals, Roman numeral I. So we put an example of the type for which we want to use, and it uses that. And if you put in a Roman numeral I, and it's going to be the first number in the list, because that's the number you're going to start with. So you can go A, B, C. You can actually start the numbering off with C or D or F, depending upon what you're putting in on the type. So you can reorder the list, or start the list at a certain ordering position as well. So let's see, we also have down here, the text placed between the EM tags is italicized. So we can have CEOs here, we have italicized in here. EM is what that's standing for. That's a new tag we haven't seen so far. So. And lo and behold, here we have the finished product where we're using regular old bullets in the outer list. We have 1, 2, 3. Looks like 3 levels that we have in here. So we have the nested list inside of the other list. And you see we automatically have the bullet changing. So nested lists are indented underneath the main list. And this is just the default bullet, by the way. And then we have the Roman numeral list that's nested inside of the main bullet list. And then we're going here with the ABC, the lowercase characters. So some sequence types available in order for lists are Roman numerals, letters, and numbers. You don't have that many to choose from. It's basically just going to be those kind of standard defaults. And then down here on the bottom, here's we have CEOs are supposed to be italicized. It doesn't really appear to be in italics in a screenshot here, but that's what it's supposed to be. And then we have a numbered list underneath it, 1, 2, 3. So tables. And to stop me as we go through these examples, I'm going to assume that this is a review, because I'm kind of putting, if the first part of the lecture that didn't get recorded, I mentioned that this particular lecture goes through everything we've done so far and puts it all together in several different examples. So that's what we're doing with this. So let's see. Tables. Let's see some example tables. And what we're going to do here is nest stuff inside of tables and change the formatting of the tables. We've seen the basic table tag so far. And if we're going to create something like this, what we also have here is we're using the headers, we're using the footer of the table, and we're using a title for the table in this particular example, as well as populating out the table with data in the table rows, which is interesting. So here we have the border attribute, which sets the size in pixels of the text border. So let's make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Let's see. There we go. I think my zooming might be throwing off my recording stuff. I'm not sure, but we'll see. Table border is equal to 1. The width is going to be equal to 40%, which means it's going to be 40% of the page, not the 100% of the page. So we can specify how big it is. If we do it in a percentage, then it doesn't really matter how big the screen is. It will always be in the same proportion, which is nice because then we can put things in percentages of each other, and then the page will always look the same. Otherwise, we're going to get word wrapping, or we're going to get things that are too big for the page. And so when the browser window opens up, it's not going to be proportioned correctly. So that's why it's all done in percentages here. With attribute gives us the width of the table. And then the summary attribute down here on the bottom, the summary is equal to, describes the summary, describes the table's contents. So this table provides information about the price of fruit. So our opening tag here, the tag opens the table, table, border, and then all of this is properties of the table tag. So what we've seen so far is, table, and then end the table and put some rows in between. So here's some examples of some attributes. Why do you want to do this? Well, when you start looking at the document template and looking at the DOM model, then we can actually start looking at, well, what's the summary of this table? Find the summary. Take the summary. Well, what is it? This is the fruit. So if we put one-word summaries, then we can use it as a tag to locate the item in the list, or excuse me, in the document, which might be helpful in terms of what's going on. So here we have the caption tag, and the caption tag here is a caption, strong, price of fruit. Well, why do I want to do a caption tag? Well, that means the caption is associated with the table, which means if the table moves, so does the caption. So a lot of people, and this is what I'm talking about actually. We go up a page here. Whoops, wrong direction. Price of fruit. This is a caption. We put the caption at the top, we put the caption at the bottom. But if it's designated as a caption and not just a piece of text that we're sticking out here, or a label or a header or something, then it's part of the structure. So we can change the caption by going at the table element, identifying the caption, changing, and also when we move the table or we work with the table, captions in centered proportionately with the 40% of the width. So it's definitely part of the table structure instead. So here we have our caption. We're using strong for it, and this is going to be the price of fruit. Then we have the text that's going to be in the table header. So TH, fed, which is really just table header. And the table header is going to be table row, table row, table row, table header, fruit, table header. And these are column headers, by the way, fruit and price. So if we go back to the previous example, we have fruit and price. And we also have a footer on the bottom, but this is going to be the header tag on the top. And we place the text in here, and it's rendered bold and centered in the text automatically by our table header tag. And then we have the body that is placed between the T body tags. So T body is for table body. So some people would leave this out actually. Instead they put another row, and you could, but you're not going to be XHTML strict. if you do that. In fact, you're going to get a warning that comes back from the W3Cs. It's going to say, hey, you know what, you haven't specified the body of this particular table. So T-body with table row, and then we have apples at 25 cents, and we have oranges, and we have bananas, and we have, and here we have the apples, and the oranges, and the bananas, and the pineapples, and things. And so the table rows are created with the TR element, and then the data is placed between the TD tags. So table row has table data number 1, and then table data number 2. You might be thinking, well, there's a lot of elements. They're actually not too bad. It's actually table itself, and then it's a hierarchy. So then we have the table header, and then we have the table body. Inside the table body, we have the table row. And inside the table row, we have the table data. That's about as low as we go. But we can nest tables inside of tables, inside of table bodies, tables inside of table headers. And if we have it all specified out in the proper hierarchy without skipping any of the sections, then we know where it is. So using the hierarchy actually makes it easier to understand what you have nested and where it's nested in terms of the abstraction, which is interesting. It lends itself well to particular instances of tables. And then lo and behold, we have the T-foot. So the T-foot is the table footer. And it's amazing how many people don't want to follow this format, because I see it all the time in tables, and I'm like, why in the world did they put it on the bottom of the table? And with a little asterisk or a little footer thing on the bottom, you know, or this, even the caption is not part of the table. You can tell because the table gets resized, but the caption doesn't, so it's not associated. So if you use the table foot, or T-footer, you can actually have this centered, and it would also belong with the table. So in here we have total, and this is going to be the same font as this down here. So a lot of people actually just put another table row in on the bottom, and they leave out the footer, or they leave out the header of the table head, and they just make it all the table, same table. Nice, interesting effect, however, if you use the components, actually. And as I mentioned before, some people make their entire web page like this. So the entire web page is a table, and inside of the table we have different sections that are spaced off by different, and this is a nice way of formatting your web page. Because then you can actually specify where things are and keep track of all of the content of the web page. Because you can stick anything you want inside of all of these different cells, which is interesting. So here's the table caption, and here's the table header, here's the start of the body, here's the body, the end of the body, and here's the table footer at the bottom. So this one is called the table.html example. So here's table 2. Table example number 2, we are using the span attributes because we're going to align. In fact, we'll just take a look at table 2 here. Here's table 2. Here's the output that we're going to get to. This is where I was saying you can put the entire body of your web page inside of a table. If you do that, then you can have a picture over here. It's going to span 2 rows in this particular case. A title. It's still spanning 4 columns this way, and then underneath it we've got another header that's nested inside, and then inside of here we have the body of the nested header, and then we have the outer table rows mixed in with the inner table rows in terms of the abstraction. So, and that's actually a fairly easy thing to put together. So we use the span here at the top, and so we align the attribute. We have an alignment attribute. So column alignment. So we're starting out with our table border. That's going to be 1, and our table is going to be, this is the beginning of our table tag. We have a caption. Here are more complex sample tables. And then we have a column group. So let me zoom in here so you can kind of see what this is looking at. So column and column group are used to format the entire columns at once. So you take one particular section of the table or a column, and you're applying the format universally to the entire column. And the span determines how many columns the column tags affect. So here we have a column group, and we can have an opening and closing column group, which we have here. And then we have a column align. So in the column group, align it to the right, span it 1, which means it's going to take up 1 cell space. And so the alignment attribute is used to horizontally align the data in the cell. So let's see. The value of the column span attribute here gives us the amount of columns that we're going to take up. So we're going to put in and we're going to merge all 4 columns together. If we come back here, what we're doing here is defining the table, defining the column group, and then we're going to add some table rows to this. So we have a table row, and the table row we're putting the image in. So we have the merging of 2 rows by using a row span, which is equal to 2, which is how we're getting this picture. So definition of the table, this is as far we've gotten. And so this is spanning 2 columns in terms of its width, and we're putting this image in here. So we have a two row column. And here's our image, it's our camel.gif. And then the height and the width we're specifying, because otherwise the image might take up the entire page, depending upon the height and width that we have here. And then we're going to merge the 4 columns together at the bottom of it. So we have a table header here. Table header. Column span is going to be equal to 4. Header, column, camel lid, comparison, approximation from 899. And here's the table header. You can notice that it is a table header. This is spanning 2 down here, 4 across. So this is the text that we're putting in next to it. And if you kind of run through it from the top of the table to the bottom of the table, it's a little bit easier to follow in terms of how you're going to create it for your abstraction. So a lot of people like to try to do the headers and the footers first, and then they try. You can do it in any order you want, but eventually you're going to need to nest it correctly. So you're going to have the table body inside of the header and the footer, and you'll have to actually space it out. And it's better, believe it or not, to actually put in comments in the code. You'll see these green comments in here in this example. Because, you know, in a couple days down the road when you look at the page, you're going to go, what is that? And then someone's going to say, can you change that picture? You're going to find the picture somewhere in there so that you can change it. Well, this is actually easy, just search on the GIF file, but in essence, you know, you want to be able to find the parts. So, and here we have changing the alignment here to vertical alignment. It's going to be equal to the bottom, so we're going to align it to the bottom of the cell instead of the top of the cell, and we're going to have some some table header here for the sub table that we put inside of the table. So, and then we've got the table header close tag. Oops, my mouse is I'm going to make this bigger so we can see the big picture. Table rows, the end of the table header. And then we're going to have the value of the row spans here. The attribute gives us the amount of rows taken up by the cell. Table data rows is equal to 2. We're using the same techniques over and over again, long story short. We're taking and we're deciding how many rows to span, and how many rows to span here, how many nestings to put in. And this is, believe it or not, just one table. It is not a table inside of a table, as I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago. It is just one table. There's no nesting. But we're using the column spans to the nth degree in order to achieve the look and feel of this particular table. So here's the program output, and down here, this stuff here is kind of trivial. It's the same stuff we've seen so far in terms of tables. So it's not a bad way of creating a table. So, all right, something new we haven't looked at very much yet, unless we have any questions on tables. The best way to learn this, however, is not to listen to me, is to cut and paste this example, put it into a text file, run it, change the tables around, change the images around, put a caption on it, put a footer on it, put a header on it, designate the table bodies, and then we'll essentially be able to assemble that. Is that a phone? Oh, okay. I'm like, I thought it was somebody outside. Okay, so HTML forms. Let's take a look at forms, because forms are kind of essential in terms of web designs these days. So here's a feedback form. The feedback form has some elements on it. It has 2 buttons, a label, another label, and a text box. And so we can use these in combination to generate some dynamic behavior for a particular website. So here we have a form tag. So the form must begin and end with a form tag. And so just like the table, we'll make this a little bit bigger so you can sort of see it. Down here we have form, and then we have method. Method is equal to post, which means the form, everything that's inside of the form tag is going to be postable. It's postable, and it's a send and a receive from an HTTP protocol. So post means that we're going to send. We're going to post it somewhere. Where are we going to post it to? The server. which means we can send this data to the server. We're not sending it to other computers. We're not sending it to anything on the current computer. Post is going through HTTP protocol. That's only going to our server. So the post here, and the action is going to be, what is this action? Well, this in particular case, it's going to run a CGI script. In other cases, it might actually run a PHP script or a Perl script or something that's on the server. If we're going to do this. We can also do this to run JavaScript. And if we do JavaScript, which we're going to see probably starting next week, actually. Because once we look at forms, then we can start making the behavior work. And then we can run either something that's done, a function that's performed or defined inside of the document, or one that's defined outside of it, or one that might be on a server. It might be on a different location. So don't think about forms in terms of having to do something on the user's computer. It's probably happening on the server. So here we have the form tag. Here gives us the method sending information and the location of the form script. Hidden inputs contain non-visual information. So this stuff is not visible. We can't see this. So the method attribute here specifies the form's data is to be sent to a web server. Post method appends the form data to the browser request. A post will put in the URL the information that's in this form. So it'll say name is equal to something, age is equal to something. So it's not what I would call a very secure way of doing it, because you're sending the data across the HTTP protocol, which is why people use scripting languages on the server. But a post goes from the client to the server. How are you going to get it there? You get it there through the URL. The URL is going to show you the plain text. So if the user's typing in their social security number, their credit card, it's not a good thing to do. Because what you're doing essentially is exposing it to the world. Because whatever it is you type in on the public HTML URL line is seen by the world. So anyone who wants to can capture that data, use it for something. So when you see forms doing this, it's usually for something non-essential, like a guest book, a registration for something where you're not giving out personal information, so, or chat or something like that. You know, something that's supposed to be public. So the value of the action over here specifies the URL of the script on the server. So then on our body of the form, and this is our tag with all of our attributes and properties associated with the form. And then we're going to put a page, just put a line return in here. And then a new paragraph, I should say. And then we have input type. Input type. So the input elements are used to send data to the script that processes the form. So input type here we have equals hidden. That means it's not shown to the user. It's not on the form. And that's going to be name. And the name is going to be recipient. And then we're going to have a value that's going to be equal to an email address. So we have a name value set that's associated with it. So we can say recipient is equal to this. And it would actually send this on the URL line. So it says recipient is equal to deedle@deedle.com. And then we have an input type here that's going to be another hidden field, and it's going to say subject. And the subject is going to be a value feedback form. So this information is going to the server. It's from this person. The recipient is to, so it's to this person. And the value of the subject is called feedback form. So now we have an input type is equal to hidden again. So the hidden values for the type attribute sends the data that is not entered by the user, it's entered by the form. So you're hard coding this, which is what they refer to it as hard coding. You're putting it into the form. That way you can self-identify the form. So you know that the form came from here. And because it's just raw data that's being sent. So you'll see hidden tags used a lot to send information that the user never sees. The user is not going to see this on the form itself. And the value here is going to be main HTML for this example. And then to continue, we're going to put something out that the user wants to see, such as the name. So we have a label, and the label is going to be name. The label doesn't do anything, but we can set some attributes on the label. We have the input name here, and so input, if it's an input, it's going to give us a box, and the name of the box is going to be name, and the type is going to be text, and the size is going to be 25, so it's going to be 25 characters long. It's going to take text. And we didn't put here hidden. We didn't put type is equal to hidden, so this one's actually going to show. This will show on the screen. Size attribute gives us the number of characters to be visible in the text box. It's actually the number of characters that it's going to show. The maximum length, which is kind of interesting because people just put the number of characters out there and then they get variable length strings that come in because it'll just scroll. It's just what's visible. If you put a maximum length in there, it stops taking in characters at a certain point. And here we have the maximum length set to 30. So you can go 5 spaces past the visible box when you're using this form. And then we're closing the label here. So the label had a name and then it had an input box, which is kind of interesting. And it's nested together inside of the label, which means we're going to have a label, and then we're going to have with a colon, and then we're going to have a space, and we're going to have an input box next to it. So anyway, so now we have an input type submit, and the submit is going to be equal to submit your entries. And then we have another input type is going to be reset. And the value says clear your entries. So the values here for the attributes displays the name of the buttons that we've created. And it's called to be submit in terms of the concept of the type. So we're setting the type as a submit, which is going to give us our button by default. And the type here is reset. It's going to give us a reset activity. So it will reset in terms of the default behavior that's associated with a button that does a reset, which is going to be clearing the screens. Clearing the screen. So the label element here describes the data that the user needs to enter into the text box. So we take a look at this, we put the pieces together. Here's the text box created using the input element. Here's the submit button. Here's the reset button. So the reset button created using the input element. We don't have to program any, because we set the type of this particular element. We don't actually have to say it's a button either. So if you're familiar with programming and kind of GUI interfaces, this is easier. Because we don't actually have to say it. We know where along the lines here we said that these are buttons. We just call these things inputs. Excuse me, we called this one a submit, this one's a reset. It's a submit button. It's a reset button. That's what that's short for. So that's usually what ends up causing some brand new people some confusion in the beginning. Oh, we put the button out there. And it's not, it's a submit. Normally you're going to use a submit. And the submit's going to be a button. So a submit button creates user input here. And you can put your own labels on there. Can you change the button? Sure, no problem. Create a style sheet that puts an image on the button. So we have a button and an image. And then you use CSS to change the button style. Make it not flat, make it transparent, make it round, or change the shape of the button, or make it look custom to some point. So that's what the form looks like. Here's form number 2. And form number 2, we'll take a look here, zoom in on the finished product so you can sort of see it before we look at the pieces of it. It's a feedback form here, which now we have comments with an email address, and now we have some checkboxes. So some checkbox options or some input here. And we still have our button, so we're just going to add a couple more elements to the form, make it a little bit more sophisticated. Let's see. So it's the same form as we looked at before. The top part's the same. So this is the same as what we just looked at a few minutes ago with the label, and then here's our label with our name, and then we have our submit button and stuff. Then we have comments. So we've put in here a label, and the label is going to be comments, and then next to the label we have a text area. So instead of an input, we use the word text area as the tag, and the name is going to be comments. And then we're specifying rows and columns. So text area element renders a text area when the page is displayed, and the size of the text area can be specified by the rows and the columns, as we've done here. Then we close the text area, and we put a little thing on the bottom that says enter your comments here. It's going to show up at the bottom of the text area. And we have another label here called email address, and this is just going to be an input. So we're putting an input tag here. We're going to call it name. The name is going to equal, we're going to call it email. So the name's going to be equal to email. The type's going to be password. When we do that, when we set the type to password, when we set the type to hidden, it hides it. We set the type to password, well, it puts those little asterisks in there. So when the user types on the screen, it doesn't see the asterisks. However, when you're posting this, it's going to see the password. The password is going to show up in the URL, not the asterisks, which is interesting. You can actually change the password character too by changing the style sheet associated with it. So instead of using asterisks, which is kind of common, you can use dashes or boxes or something. And then you're going to confuse the user because when they're typing it in and they see boxes, they're not going to know, oh, that's a hidden password. So it's funny, users are actually kind of trained by what they're familiar with. So when you start changing the styles of some of these tags, then you end up confusing the user in the long run. So let's say we have email with a password here, and then things you like, and here's the checkboxes. So now we have a label that's going to be saying site design, and then we have an input name, and the input name is going to be equal to things liked. And then down here we have name things liked, and we have names things liked, because the names are all the same, they're all belonging to the same group. So the checkboxes that belong to the same group must have the same value in the name attribute, which they do. And setting the input type element's type attribute to checkbox will create the checkbox. You can have radio boxes, checkboxes. This is how you're going to specify, and here's the checkbox here. Type is equal to checkbox, checkbox. You can put different things in the same group by giving it the same name. So you can have radio boxes, which are round ones, versus text boxes, versus a whole bunch of stuff, all with the same name. They all have the same name, which means they're taking one value, and the one value is being submitted. So it's when you click on one, another one's going to be deselected. Click on one. So you can also create it by changing the name to something unique. You can make it so you can multiple select. So you can select all 5 of the checkboxes. What you want to do, especially if you said, what do I want to have more information on? I'm not going to group them all together because that's just going to be one item. So you can put like 5 different items out there, give them all different names, take them out of the group, and you have this group's got this one, yes, 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 and they all can be selected, which makes it more functional if you're looking for multiple inputs. And the rest of this is just going to be your input and your submit and your reset button. The same thing we saw before with the value. The values are going to be the text that's showing up on the screen. Why didn't they call it a label? I don't know. So here's our text area that's created with the input field. And here's the checkbox option created with the input element down on the bottom here. So things you liked. So let's see what we have going on here. Here's another example, form number 3. Form number 3, actually, form number 3. Here's form number 3. Let's see, radio boxes are going to be added with the input elements. And not to mislead you, you can multiple select these actually, because although they're under the same name and the same grouping, you can multiple select them. It's not, the values are not set for each one of them individually. Excuse me, the values are not set for the group, they're set for each one of them individually, which gives us that option. I have another example. In fact, this one here is going to show you which one of the radio buttons. And also now we have a rating, we have a drop-down box that we're going to add. So we can populate a list box, which again is going to be called a drop-down box with input items that are going to show up when you select the little arrow. Click on the little arrow here. It's going to open up an option and you select one. You can also make it so you can select multiple as well at the same time. So let's take a look at the code that's associated with this one. So kind of a longer one here, but a lot of this stuff is repeated. So now we have the feedback form, and you're going to fill in the blanks in here. And this is the same stuff as before. This is the hidden information we're going to send along with the form and the label. And now we have the things you like, and then just to repeat the concept here, the types are all going to be checkboxes. The input names all together in terms of things. And then now we have a source code here for a label, and then we have a things here down here. So that's the last thing button. And then the input type here. So now the input type is going to be equal to radio. Instead of checkbox, we have radio. So type is going to be equal to radio. And then we have checked is equal to checked. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see this. The checked attribute will mark this radio option by default. So which means this one is selected. So we want to select one normally, because if we don't select anything, then when the user doesn't click on anything, it doesn't have any default value, it comes back empty. We don't know. So if the user didn't select on something, the default value is always selected. So it's different from the button itself. because there's a different button itself, different from the checkbox because it's a radio round button. And only one radio button in the group can be selected. So by default, when you create the radios, the round buttons, only one can be selected. In the other one, we have multiples in this particular case. So that's the difference between the radio buttons and the checkboxes. So let's see. So this one's going to be checked here for the search engine. And this is going to be type radio, radio, radio. And input element type radio equals to radio creates radio buttons, which is why they came out with the word radio, but I don't know, because it has a radius, and it's radio. Round button. Yeah, round. It's not really a button either. It's a checkbox, but it's round instead of a button. I mean, excuse me, instead of a box. Okay, so now we can have a rating here. So we can rate the site. So the select tag here represents a drop-down list, and here's our drop-down list called ratings. So the name is called ratings. So when we look at the rating value, we can go, what is rating equal to? Rating is going to be equal to whatever is selected. So we go selected. And what's selected, we can actually just say by default, selected is selected. The first option is going to be selected, and it's going to be amazing. And then we're going to put 10, 9, 8, awful on the bottom on our options here. So very similar to the ordered list and the unordered list and the bullets. We have, excuse me, and the actually just like the tables as well, we can nest the tags. So here we have a select name rating, option selected, and then we have inside we have option, 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 option. Each one of the options is a list, not a list item or an element, it's an option. So, and the text in between is what appears on the menu. So the select element creates a drop-down list. And we can also set it so we have more than one visible by having how many elements are showing, setting it to 3 or 4. But usually when it's a multiple select, we would do that. When it's a single select option, we only have the first one by default showing, and then you can click on the little arrow, opens it up, you can click on another one. And that's the one that's going to come out as being selected. So the selected attribute selects the default value. It doesn't have to be the first. It can be any one of the values in the list where you're going to select it. And the option tag is used for each one of the options in the drop-down list. So we have an opening and closing option tag, very similar to the ordered list and the unordered list, actually. Alright, so here's our form here. So the radio box list that's created with the input elements here. And here's our drop-down list. So the drop-down list was created with the input element. Amazing option was selected as the default value. That's what the form looks like. And then only one of these is going to be selected. So which ones did you like? Multiples, and only one of the other ones. So, and then here's the usage of the form. Let's see. Here we go, where we have amazing. So, in fact, as a web user, essentially, you're familiar with the behavior for the most part. Unless you just crawled out from under a rock and have never used a website before, or have never used a form before. Which is an advantage, actually, as a form creator, having experience in this, because then you know what users like and users don't like. So, usually down here on the bottom, you'll have a little button here that says, show password or show. It just basically takes this attribute from it being a password and changes it back into text. So. But here's what our password field looks like. And here we have multiple selected here, only one selected here with our drop-down list. So. Alright. So let's see. Navigating on the same page. We've kind of seen this before, but we'll put together a more complex example because this is what you'll need to do for one of the assignments that you're going to create, where you're going to have navigation that occurs where you click a button and it goes to another section of the page. We've seen a kind of a primitive example of this already. This is a little bit more detailed. So clicking on the initial link, the internal link will bring the user to the bottom of the page where the 3 favorite CEOs is located. So it's nice to be able to house the entire site on one page and then just navigate the user to different sections of it. A little bit easier to organize as well sometimes. So here we have our internal links here, and as I remember before, we create these little tag areas. So our H hyperreference is going to be this tag. So internally link, we place the dollar sign, or excuse me, hash sign, can't think today, in front of the name of the desired anchor element within the page, and number sign will say go to CEOs. So then down on the bottom, you're going to essentially have a CEOs section, hopefully. Probably going to be on our next page. And here it is. So here's the named, it's called a named anchor. And so here's our named anchor. Our named anchor is specified by the name A for anchor. And the name is going to be equal to CEO. So this is the same anchor tag that we use to go to a hyperreference, that we go to a CEO. We're calling it CEO because this is what we're going to. So in our anchors, we can tag with inside the document to go to different sections. You see this in help documents all the time because you're not going to make 50 million different help pages. It's all going to be in one page. You're going to have a list of, or an index, and you're going to click on the index items and it's going to take you to the section that you're interested in getting help on. This is how you're probably going to perform it if you're going to use HTML to do this. So the anchor here is named CEOs, will be created at this point in the page. So the anchor does not link, and so it will be seen on the same, so it will not be seen on the page actually. However, the anchors can be referred to within the page. So it takes you from this piece of the page and makes the focus to this piece of the page. So the behavior actually gives you the illusion of you going to a different page sometimes, depending upon what's visible on the screen. So, and here's our example here where we're clicking on the internal link here. Will bring us to the bottom of the page where the 3 My Favorite CEOs is located. So here it takes you down to here. So kind of actually sort of does give you the illusion that you're going to a different page in some aspects. It's an illusion. Actually, what you can do is not mentioned in the slide set, but it's not a bad thing to mention at this point, is not only anchoring from within the same page, but also anchoring externally and then changing the size of the window. So then it will, and then taking the window properties, taking the border off the window, taking the menu off the window, the title bar off the window, making it into a dialog, and then it looks like a pop-up window actually. And then at that point you can load anything you want into that window, and it just calls it automatically. And then of course you just created your own pop-up window. But and most web browsers will block that. But it actually kind of gives you, in theory, kind of gives you an interesting way of linking from within the page to another window that has the same page in it. It's just lower down into the page. That looks like a dialog box, not really a window. So, unfortunately, though, most blockers will, most web blockers will take that off and make the functionality not work for you unless you turn the behavior back on. So we looked at image maps. So this is another example. It puts all the pieces together. I believe last lecture we looked at, it was like a week ago, so it's hard to remember, but we had a big old image and we clicked on pieces of the image and it brought up different URLs. So in this particular example, what we're looking at is putting it together. So we have, this is the menuing system. So we have a home page link, other links, contact information link, feedback link. When you hover your mouse over, it says go to feedback form. Go to the main website. And the menuing system itself is done this way in terms of the linkage. So here we have the area element that is used for the hotspots. So we talked about hotspots, and this is basically putting all the pieces together today. So we actually covered image maps. And if you missed last week, that's probably where you're going to find the most help in terms of the concept. So we put an image out here, the image, the map, we're going to create a map. So the map tag defines the image map. Just to refresh your memory on the concept, and we're going to give it a name. The ID is going to be a picture. So the shape in here is going to be rectangle, indicates a rectangle. The area with the coordinates is going to give us our upper left, right, or left coordinates. So here I have our area with a hyperreference to form HTML. The shape is going to be a rectangle. What does that mean? Well, it means the shape of the area that we're specifying by the coordinates is rectangle. We can make circular shapes, oval shapes, depends upon what it is we're trying to achieve in the clicking pattern. So in a square, though, in that particular example you looked at, most of them would click in the rectangular kind of fashion by default. So the shape attribute gives you the shape of the hotspot. And then the alternative here is go to the feedback form, which means if you don't click on it, that's how you're getting that little feedback to occur. So we have this go to the feedback form. This is the little arrow, pointer arrow that we're clicking over it. So that's how you get, by putting alternative text in there as alt, that's how you're going to get into the labels, which makes it look like it's clickable. Not a bad idea, because then you know it's clickable. And the cursor, you can actually change the cursor and make it clickable. I don't know, you know, make it look funny, or put the little words in there. So then we have the coordinate system. So the first two integers coordinate system are the x, y, upper left hand and corner of the rectangle. And then the last two integers are defined by the x, y coordinate for the lower right hand corner of the rectangle. So we're specifying the upper left hand, lower right hand, and then the space in between is all clickable by our definition here. So go to contact page, go to main page. These are all of the different coordinate systems. So how do you get that? Well, you load up one of the examples I gave you last week that shows you the coordinate systems. You put your arrow up at the top of where you want it to start. You put your arrow at the bottom where you want it to end. And you copy those down on a piece of paper. You go in and you put them in here. And you essentially have your coordinate system. And so then we can assign a poly to the shape attribute here. So we have the shape poly. And the poly is going to be alternative. Text is going to be email. So it's going to be, I believe it's a circle. Let's take a look here. Attributes creates a polygon with coordinates defined by the coordinate attributes. Well, let's take a look here. Where's our email? I believe this is going to be our email, perhaps. Up here. Maybe this one has it. This one doesn't have the email on it. But it's not very clear where it is, actually. But it's using a polygon for its shape. And then we have a circle down here. So we're going to assign a circle. Right here, shape is equal to circle. For the to create a circle, the center of the radius is going to be the coordinate system. So we enter the coordinate system for the circle. And you're going to look up the coordinates that you're going to need for each one of the shapes that you're going to create, because you're never going to remember which ones you're going to use. So the image map that's assigned is going to be using the use map, as we saw before, the use map. And then we say the pound sign, number sign, whatever, picture. And picture was the one we defined in the previous slide up here, where we have picture. So here's our map ID picture. Here's our map ID with all of our URLs. And then we're going to put an image out there. It's going to be deedle.gif, and it's going to be a height and width of this. And the alternative is going to be Deedle logo. And it's going to say use the map picture. And use the map picture. So this coordinate system here pretty much has to be assigned to the picture size. So when we make the picture smaller, the coordinate system with side of the picture stays the same. Which is kind of interesting. So different size browsers, different size pictures. You zoom in on the picture, you make it bigger. Well, the percentages in the coordinate system that's relative to the picture don't change. So the weights are going to be matched up correctly. So if you use the image map with the image, you're guaranteed an exact match. So a lot of people don't like to use image maps for some reason. They won't do it this way. Instead, they'll just put hotspots on the page. And then the hotspots change. The images get moved around. And then, so you want to link it together this way. So it guarantees that your links are going to work for the coordinates that you've defined that are relative to the picture size that you've created. Plus it makes it a little bit easier, and this is simple. So everybody who tries to work around this concept makes it more complex in terms of the clicks, hyperlinks, and everything else you're going to put in there. So what you could do is take this entire picture, break it out into separate little pictures, and put hyperlinks on the separate little pictures and put the pictures together. Way too complicated. This is actually easier. So you see the pound sign in front of the name of the image map indicates that it's an internal map. It's the same kind of concept. Pound sign is used everywhere to say that the link's internal, the picture's internal. So we know that's not outside of the web environment. It's actually in the same web page. So selecting the feedback hotspot links to the feedback page. Where's the feedback? Well, here it is on the bottom, and it opens up the feedback form that we saw in the previous example. Hotspots created using the area. So we have the links, contact information, feedback, homepage. Makes it nice and handy. Menus and frames. Well, this should look familiar if you're still having problems. In fact, there's no reason why anyone hasn't turned in that first and second assignment or so, because I've given you all the code for it. And here it is again if you're interested. Because we have menus and frames. This is what you're doing actually in the first assignment. So no excuses, you guys. I'm giving you the code. So here's your menu on the left-hand side. Here's your header on the top. This is a frame that we're putting together. And as I mentioned before, frames don't necessarily are the best thing to use because they have issues. You can't print out everything together. These are almost like 3 different separate web browsers all in one. So we have the meta name that's given, and so here's how we're going to put the frame together in this example to put the pieces together. The meta element provides the information to search engines about the document itself, which is interesting. So you might try this out if you get one of those free websites. Put a bunch of metadata in here, keywords. Remember I talked about metadata? I said you put that, it's a metadata tag. You put it in the website and then search engines find you. So put a bunch of stuff in there like ITU, and so actually it's like, I don't know, whatever, and then you type in, go do a Google search, and you'll see, oh, there's my page. But put some weird stuff in there, like maybe misspell a word or something, and see what happens. It does take a while. In fact, it probably takes several hours once you post something on the internet for the search engines to find it. It's not like an instantaneous thing, because those are algorithms that are running that are caching information. So your Google engine, after a couple of days, it'll pick it up. Immediately, probably not, because it's already cached findings, and it has to actually refresh itself and clear because it doesn't know exactly what's everywhere on the internet constantly. So it's not like it runs in 100% real time. But search engines, they do that. They go out and they look and they read the content and they keep a catalog of websites to index it. And so sometimes the metadata is used for the indexing, depending upon the search engine. So it makes your page more findable in the search results. So here's the name attribute that describes the type of meta element. Meta name, here we go, meta name. Here's a description, keywords. You can also use this for cataloging. So it catalogs your site in different other sites that might be using your site, which is good because then other web pages can read the document and go, or other web engines can read the document and say, what's the description? What are the keywords? It's kind of like how if you've ever written a paper for publication, you have a description, metadata, and you have a keyword metadata, and it gives you the cataloging for what periodical was this in, what topic, what subtopic, what area to organize it with. And then here we have content in here. The content is the attribute that provides the information that search engines use to catalog the pages. So search engines will go through and index everything and create its own catalog, because that's how it comes back with the results so quickly, which is why it takes you a couple hours or a day or so before this actually makes it into their catalog, because they're not doing it in real time. Like every so number of days the catalog gets refreshed, depending upon if it's Google or Yahoo or whoever it is you're using. So give it some time and you'll notice after a couple of days or so it will, oops, there we go. Type permit there, my screen went blank. It will refresh itself. So here we have our frame set, going back to our frame example. So the frame set element informs the browser that the page contains frames. So here we have frame set. And this is in the same HTML document. I've just scrolled to the next page. The frame set tag sets the frame dimensions, and now we have 110 comma asterisk, which means fill in the blanks of whatever's left over. It's going to basically fill up the entire pixels of 110. So the column attribute gives the width of the frames, and the first vertical frame created is 110 pixels from the left of the browser, and the second one is going to be the frames filled by the rest of the browser. It's a value of an asterisk, which means we don't necessarily know how big that is. You're probably not going to fill in both, because then when the user loads it up into a small browser, the whole page is going to have to be scrolled to the right or to the left. It won't fit into the page itself naturally. So the bigger you make the first frame on the left, the smaller the one on the right is going to show up in a regular old web browser, which is a problem with frames. You can't, a table you can actually determine the percentage for each one of them. And you're sort of determining the percentage here, but frames don't work the same way and they don't look as good. Okay? You can make it so that the frame's so small you can't even see it. So, it's not going to resize, it's going to be in that proportion for the entire page. So here are the individual frame elements that's specified within the page that are going to appear for each one of the given frames. So you're going to have a frame name, left frame, and another frame name called main in this case. And then here's how you're going to load your two different ones. You're going to have one that does navigation, and maybe you're going to call it nav.html. This is what you're doing for one of the assignments for this course, actually. And then you're going to have another frame that's going to be the source main frame. So the frame element here, loads the documents in the frame set. The source attribute gives you the name of the document, and here's the two names of the documents that are loaded into the left and to the right frame that we're going to use. And here's what it looks like here. We have a no frames element up here. This page uses frames, but your browser doesn't support them. Huh? So if there's no frame support in the browser, it will tell you. So you might want to play around with that one actually and see which browsers actually still support it and which ones don't. Because if the browser is not supporting it, the page is going to look like really bad actually when it loads up. So no frames element provides an option for the browser that do not display frames. You can put text in there, or you can actually redirect it to a no frames page. So that's what a lot of people actually do, is we put a redirect in there. Put a redirect in there, there's a JavaScript command that you can do just to redirect it. It's actually called a redirect, so you can take it to another page. And it's just going to be another HTML document that doesn't have frames on it, essentially. And you can actually put a pause in there, so it says, your browser doesn't support this. Wait, locating, redirecting, or whatever, and then, instead of it going instantly. So here's our right frame on our main, our left frame over here, and how the pieces actually fit together in terms of the concept. And here's our output of clicking on the items over here. So if you're still having problems with that exercise, you can use the slide set lecture number 6. The code's given for you in here. Cut and paste to put it into a text file, and there's half of your assignment done for you right there, actually. So when the header examples is selected here, the document will appear in the right frame, given the left frame. And here's the text for that, for the navigation. So here's the target. So links.html here is the target, href for the main, and then we have main, contacts, lists, links, links, contacts in here, lists in here. So the target attribute specifies where the document link will be anchored to, and then putting in an image in here. These are image buttons that are being used for that, along with alternative text. So the document will open up in the main frame here because we said target is equal to main. So as long as we say target, we put a label on the frames and we say the target is equal to that label, that's where it's going to open up in terms of the concept. Here's our target for main. Other values of the target can be specified on the load document into a new browser window. So you can actually have a target not being one of those frames, but a new window that opens up. And if it's a new window, then you can set all the attributes on that as well. And so the anchor will appear onto a full web browser window, removing all of the frames, actually. Which is interesting because you can actually load it within the same window, taking the frames out, which is kind of confusing completely. Because one of the things about good UI design is having what they call a sitemap concept, where you've got a menu that stays constantly and you know exactly where you're at. So if you have using frames for this and you take the frames away, well, there goes your menu. So a lot of people will divide the page out and then put HTML pages for the header and for the footer, and then load them in, so every single page has always the same header and footer. And one of them is going to have the navigation on it, usually the header. And then the bottom is going to have more help. Here's our address. Here's our telephone number. We don't like your website. I'm going to call you instead, kind of stuff. So the vertical frames here on the right is divided into 2 horizontal frames. So we're going to take the frames and we're going to subdivide the frames as well in this last example about frames. And then the rows attributes is similar manner to the columns attributes, except for the rows attributes give us the height of each one of the frames. So we have the rows 175 in this particular case. And here's how we have this right frame loaded up into 2 separate frames. So we've essentially nested a frame inside of a frame. So the nested frame elements split the right vertical and the 2 horizontal frames. So 2 horizontal frames are over here. Don't get too carried away with frames, because frames are not necessarily supported by every browser. So we looked at cascading style sheets in all of the different pieces, but we haven't seen it put together. So here's your examples of everything put together in source code. So as I was mentioning before, feel free to use these examples in anything that you want. That's why I'm giving them to you. because they're nice. So we had inline, then we had external, then we had cascading, and we talked about all the little concepts, but we haven't really seen very many examples associated with it. So here's your examples. So here we have the style attribute here. We have a paragraph style. Zoom this in a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. Style attribute specifies the style of the element. And here's some sample properties for font and for color, actually. P, paragraph, style is equal to font size. Well, that's a pretty big paragraph. These are called inline style tags. Not done in this is CSS, by the way. But you know, there's 3 different ways of doing it, as I mentioned before. This is just one of them. And in every assignment that uses CSS, I'll tell you which way I want you to do it. Normally it'll be in an external file, but you can do it internally as well this way. So this would be considered the inline approach, where we're specifying, and then we're giving the paragraph. This is the text. And then we're going to say inside, we're going to overwrite here, we've got the italics. So inside of the style, we're putting italics in, which is interesting. And then down here we have a P style. Paragraph style is going to be font size 20. Same thing, but now we're going to change the color. We're going to use the RGB scale colored. And we're going to say that this is some text in here. We're also going to put embed a tag in here as well. We can embed tags anywhere we want. Hard to change those embedded tags, however. If we made this instead, what is this that we're doing here? Font size. If we wanted to have every time we saw font size, we could create a style for something and then just specify the style for the individual text that we were using and automate it so that when the style changed, we say, well, we don't want this to be italicized anymore. We want them to be bold instead. You'd have to go through and search the entire document for all of the EM tags and change them to Bs. Much easier to update one little style sheet, actually, and say, okay, now this kind of paragraph is now going to look like this instead. Or this kind of text is going to look like this. You can use it for text, for paragraphs, for sections, for headers, for footers, all sorts of different styles you can apply. You can apply more than one style sheet and more than one style for the entire page as well. So here's what it looks like. Actually, we see the font size here, colors also italicized. This text here doesn't have any style applied to it. These two do, in terms of the inline styles that we've created here. So we can kind of sort of see how that might come in handy for certain things. And let's zoom out so you can see this one here. So we can have it declared, and we're declaring it in the header section. So this would be in the body. So the first one we looked at was the inline, where we're just putting the styles in along with the text that we're putting. Here we're going to actually declare it, but we're going to put it in the body of the HTML page. Only problem with this is it's stuck inside of this page. If we wanted to use another page, we have to cut and paste this and put it inside of the next page. The idea of this is to make everything look the same. So if we take it out and just include the file, that's probably going to be the most efficient way. But what if this page is going to look different than everything else? So if we did this, this will override the external, which is nice. So in the head section, we have the title. It's going to be a style sheet. Okay, that's the name of the page. This begins the style sheet. So we have style type is equal to, and then we're specifying that we're creating a style sheet. And then we have style closing tag. So in here we're going to have EM, which is going to be our italics. Well, we're going to change. We're going to say the background color is going to be this, and the color is going to be white instead of black. And the H1 is going to look like this, and the P is going to look like that. And how do we know what it's going to look like? Well, styles here are going to be placed in here, and we're going to separate here. We're going to say background dash color colon something semicolon, and then we're going to specify each one of them. So here we have Arial, we have font family, font size, and each one of these are separated by the attributes that are associated with the properties. So we have more style properties included: font type, font family, background. And you're going to look up all of these to see which ones you're going to set for each one of the different elements that you're interested in changing or modifying. So a style class named special here, .special, is created, and we apply special to each one of the styles that we're going to use it with. So the style class is inheriting all the style properties of the style sheet in addition to its own properties that are being set. So if we use a style sheet with this, it'll use the style sheet, but it will also use anything that we've put inside of the header section, inside of a declared document. And then this is how we use it. We say h1 class is equal to special. And then it goes back to the document head section. Where is this special? And I'll apply special to that particular. And here we have p class is equal to special, h1 class is equal to special. So it's the tag followed by the word class equal to whatever style sheet we want to have it equal to. The styles associated with special class are applied to the header and the paragraph elements in this particular case. And then we're also using other stuff in here that we want to use. Other tags. We don't have to use just those tags. Everything is still available to us. So here's what the output looks like. We have white text on a purple background color. And this is special. And so you notice that the styles defined in the CSS are applied to all the paragraphs. Headers are now in bold text. And then the elements that are in the special are applied to the special class. So we've overridden everything else. And so this one here, this paragraph is special, and then this was also special. In terms of the EM, is actually the italicized that we changed. So now we have a way of taking and doing some advanced concepts with it. So actually I was going to make that bigger. There we go. So now we have the anchor here. So we go a dot no decimal, a dot hover. So when we put the mouse over it, no declaration, no style, which means turn off the underline that we get for the viewed links or the unviewed links and things. An unordered list. So here we have the style class that is defined specifically for the A element or the anchor element, and then we have the style that's applied if the element class attribute is set to no declaration. And then the hover, which is the pseudo class here, that's defined for the event to activate it dynamically when the mouse moves over, hovers over dynamically. And then here we have the EM. So the EM element of the LI element is defined to have the bold red font. So we're subclassing. So we have of the list item, the italicized element. The color is going to be equal to red, the font weight is going to be equal to bold. But other ones outside of the list element are going to be the other ones. So we essentially have nested them here. So the style within this, and then the hover of the anchor. Or we could have a hover of a text too, or we can have a hover of a paragraph or a hover of something. But it's usually the anchor that we're interested in changing in this particular case. So here's the EM element of the LI, and then here we have the unordered list, so the elements of an unordered list in another nested unordered list will be underlined, and we'll have a left-hand margin of 15 pixels. So it says inside of an unordered list, the unordered list itself. It's going to look like that. And then we have, according to the CSS defined, the 3 elements listed under the bread here are going to be in, because these are unordered lists inside of an unordered list, and they're going to apply that different attribute we just declared. And what we're doing is just using the tags. And then as we're using the tags, it's going to apply what we've set in terms of the style here. We haven't given the style a name, we're just applying the style to the body. And we're applying the style to the body by defining it in the head. So they'll automatically be defined without actually having to specify the class. Because up here we haven't specified any class, we're just using the elements here. So here, the text placed within the EM tag should be bolded and colored in red because it's inside of a list item. So it should look up differently than other. And then we've got going on here, class is equal to no dec. Well, we're actually going to specify the class for no declaration. So when the user scrolls over the text anchoring the link, the hover class will be activated and the text will be changed to the style in the hover class. So here's what it looks like. We've got bold and red with mushrooms because it's an EM used inside of an unordered list. And then we have the items in here. So the items that are nested in the unordered list are indented by 15 pixels from the left margin. So that's done automatically for us because we've specified it in the head section, which is another benefit of doing it this way. You can set it for the entire document, so it applies towards all of the EMs or all of the unordered lists that are inside of the unordered list or something, or tables inside of tables are done a certain way. You can basically set the template here. And this is our hover. So apply the hover pseudo-class to the anchor. So the background is changed in here when the user hovers over the particular item with their mouse. So. And if we were to stick this in an external style sheet, this is what it looks like. The interesting thing is there's no opening and closing style tag because we're not defining it. We're not specifying a type as a style sheet either because we don't have to. We're not putting it in the same HTML document. So when we do it externally, we just put in the H. This is the same code as we saw before in the header section. We just cut it out of the header, put it in a separate file, and save it. We don't even have to save it with a .css extension. Save it with whatever you want. If you don't put a .css extension on there, people are going to wonder what's in that file. So it makes it self-identifiable if you call it a CSS. You don't actually have to. But this is the same stuff here. It's just put into a CSS file. And then if you do that, you link it in. So how do you link it in? The link element is used here to link in the external style sheet. So link space relative. Well, the relative is the attribute used to define the linking relationship. So relative relationship is equal to style sheet. Type is going to be equal to text CSS. And here it is. The href is going to be style.css. So we got 2 lines. Well, actually, it's really just 1 line. You can put it all on. This is 1 line, actually. It says link this relative, this relationship with this file over here. Call it a style sheet here because the text is going to be text CSS. And here it is. So most people will actually do this technique. Take everything out of the header sections, put it in the external, and just list them. In fact, you can put comments in there to say, hey, this is for the head, this is for the footer, this is for the header, this is for the paragraphs, this is for the special stuff over here, so you know what it is. And then you just include it in, and the entire document's going to be formatted that way for you automatically, which is why this is so popular. So the type attribute defines the MIME type here. Well, you don't need to know that, but you're going to use this text CSS. So, alright. So here's our same thing as before. The output's not going to look that different. Back to the output, we would hope would look the same. We're just pulling it out of the header and putting it into a file and including the file in terms of the link. And if we validate it, it comes back correctly, even if we're using a cascading sheet. So enter the name of the document that you're going to validate, and then you upload the CSS source file, and it'll check the CSS along with the documents. So you can validate both of them together, and then you can know whether or not they're both strict, or whether or not you're using it correctly. So here we have the CSS validation results. No errors or warnings found in this particular example if you upload it and take a look at it, because it's done properly. If you put something in there and CSS is wrong, then I'll come back and say, oh, you have errors in your CSS. You know, the format's incorrect or something. Or, you know, the style is being overridden or something. Or, well, overriding is okay, but usually you have improperly formed tags or something that would cause the problem. So layering images. Put an image on top of an image on top of an image on top of an image. Not too bad, actually, because then you can remove images. So you're just changing the positions. So you can do that and then layer them and then put image maps in there, and then you can click all over the place if you wanted to. So here's the position property of the style element that allows the positioning of the element. So position, colon, absolute. And this is our image source is going to be I or 1.gif, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to have a top position. Alternative is going to be this is positional image. This is number 1. Then we have the Z index property. So we have X, Y, and Z. It makes it 3-dimensional. So Z is going to be the different layers of all of the images that we're going to put in there. And you can just click and then goes an image hit. The images can go away, or the images you can go down depending upon which image you clicked on. Use a separate image. So the Z property allows the layering of the multiple images. So the images are layered, such as the images with the lower Z indexes are placed under images with higher ZXs. So the higher the Z position, 2, 1, 3, whatever, the higher the number, the more visible it is to the user. And here we have Z.index colon 2, which is going to give us our Z index. So the effects of the Z index property in several different layers on top of one another. So this is layered images. Kind of time consuming to load, especially if the images are big. not done too often anymore, but originally it was done before Flash and before a bunch of other things came out, because then you can create some interesting animations and some interesting dynamic behavior by loading and changing the Z's and the positions to make the images actually look kind of cool. So here's our positioning here. If we take a look at this example, whoops, where we have super, sub, shift left, shift right positioning. So another positioning example with the relative positions of an element relative to the reference point on the page. We can shift items around, make some interesting animations. So an instance when the class is applied to the element will be displayed 1 centimeter relative to the left in this particular case. And so here's the kind of the concept here. So the text in the red has a shift left class applied to it and is shifted left relative to where it was initially placed. So it's kind of shifted here to the left so it moves over. So it's just a way you can position things on the page to make some interesting. If it's not an image, this is done with text actually, but you can do it with images as well to move the images around. So here's a background image. So we have the background image property assigned to the background of the body of the page over here. So we have the body as a background image of something. So we can take the entire page by its contents, change the header background, the body background, the footer background, depending upon what we're doing in terms of the sections of these pages. So the background position assigns the location of the image on the page. We're going to position it left bottom, right bottom. It's a bit how it's going to be aligned. And a repeat or don't repeat. So sometimes you see the tiled repeating background images. It's just a matter of saying repeat, which will tile the image on the background. And then the value of the background attachment, where there's going to be whether the property is going to be determined whether the image moves as the user scrolls through the page or whether it's fixed. You see some of the pages where you can scroll down and the image is gone. Well, it doesn't move, just it's fixed, which is not bad because most likely if you're going down to the bottom of the page, you don't want to have that image reload itself because it's going to take up too much time if you're searching for something. And then P for the paragraph section, so the font format specified that applies to the P element in this particular case. So here's our example completed here where we have this image is on the background. It's in the lower right hand position of the page. And note that there's no formatting needed to set the P element itself because it's already been defined in the CSS. And this essentially, I forgot to mention, this is the CSS style that was creating this. So the CSS style was actually creating the background image. We're not putting the background image on the page. Here is the header section, and the header section is defining all of the styling, and we just applied it by using a P for a paragraph, and then automatically got the text in a certain color, and we automatically got the image on the background. So you can use the CSS to define the image and to position the image onto the page relative to the text or relative to the location. So also the width here. So now we have a div tag. The elements placed between a div tag will be set on their own line with a margin below and after it, and with a background color, and a margin bottom is 0.5. So the width and the height attributes of the style allow the user to indicate the percentage of the width and the height of the screen elements in which it's going to occupy. So here's our example of our style sheet. We have div defined, and the div tag is going to have a background color of this, a margin of that, and then we say div style equals, and we're going to say the width is going to be 20%. We have the width is going to be 80%, and the alignment is going to be center. So we're changing the style and when we're applying it. So here we have the differences and the effect that happens here. So this will set the overflow attribute and add the scroll bars as well. So we say overflow : scroll, which means we can scroll here on this text section. This adds a nice little effect, especially when you want to put user comments and put them into a layout. You don't know how many lines the user has commented with, but you want it to fit a particular section of the page. So you use a div tag, put the comments that received from a database query or something, put it out on the page, and then make it scrollable and fixed. so that you can not necessarily have the comments messing up the rest of the form. So you can, or in fact, what a lot of people do is they take a shortcut and they only take one line of the comments, and then you're missing the rest of it, because some people don't like the look of the scroll bars on the windows. So mixing images and text together, and we're almost done. We're going to be out in another 10 minutes or so. So, so here we have images and text that are mixed together, which is a pretty interesting effect. Essentially what we're doing is we're specifying out, and here we have the floating example, where we have floating text here that is in different sections. Nice when you're going to do a document, I would say. So the float property allows you to move an element one side of the screen to the other in terms of the document and flow it around. So you can take text and wrap it around other items. It's kind of like what we do with wrapping. When we use Microsoft Word, we put a picture in there and we say, wrap it around, set a margin of 2 inches around the picture or something, or 1 inch around the picture, around the item. Well, you can do this with text to text. Same thing in Microsoft Word, actually. Images to text. All sorts of different items can be put in there. The margin property specifies the distance around the edges of the element that you're wrapping the other content around. So you can set the margin here and make it text alignment to the right and float the margin at 0.5, it looks like here, centimeters or something. And then padding is the difference between the content itself and the element's border. And then we have clear. Clear is going to be equal to align. Clear property is going to be used to interrupt the flow of the text around the floating element. So this is the concept here where we're putting in the padding and we're putting in the elements and the spacing. So we have the padding here inside of the element, and then we have the spacing that goes around the elements. So you can create a nice looking newsletter format or something in HTML, which is similar to what we see in a word processor editor. So we have text flow and box models. So we have margins, borders, and padding. That's what we looked at, actually. So the box model for a box level element, we put content in a box, and then we take the box and we float it, which is what the other example was doing, and we float it among other text or other elements, or then we nest it. So we have the border width, and it's the same properties, or very similar properties we get with tables, actually. But you can do this inside of tables as well and apply the same effect. So we have thickness, medium, thin, groove, inserted, outserted, to get the effect of the boxes being indented or raised. These are the box styles, I should say. So the border width property can be set by the width, the border style property set by the style groove in this particular case, and the border color. In this particular case, we set it to red. And so here's the example of this, all of this output. So we have this like indented, extented, or the border width is being increased. So we take a look at, here's a sample of the different types of borders. I will make this a little bit bigger so you can sort of see what I'm talking about. I'm going to increase it. We can kind of see the text as a border. And we have the border size. And we have the red and the different color lines that are associated with it. So different effects. It's just a sampling. Not what I'd call a good sampling. Not that good looking, but shows you some of the effects. Here's another example specifying the border directly through the style element of the div tag. So div style is going to be equal to, and putting it here instead of putting it up in the header section. So you're putting it in the body, and you're specifying the style along with the element instead of putting it in the CSS. It's going to accomplish the same thing. And we have the kind of a similar effect, and this is just a sampling. There's different things that you could apply to it. So here, what are we going to do here? We're going to specify a CSS, and we're going to override the CSS. So the author defined a style sheet, and one is defined within the page. So we have an external style sheet being used, and then inside we're going to say, let's add this element to it. So instead of putting it in the style sheet, the author of this particular page has decided we're going to add something to the style sheet. So you can see here in the picture, oops, where we have the style type, we've put the style sheet in here, then we've added this. So by using the absolute measurement PT, in this particular case, developer will override the user-defined style sheet. And this one here is going to have a different font size to it used inside of this page. So it kind of brings you to the concept of the cascading component of this. Although if you use an external style sheet, we're going to override it. I'm going to create a new one, or we're going to add to it that's not in the original style sheet. So we get everything that we've included plus some that we're going to put in the header section that we're going to define. So here's the developer defined class applied to the P, and the element decreases the font size of the text. It does look a little bit smaller. So the style sheet sets the authors have a higher priority, higher precedence over the style sheet used by the style sheets that are external. So whatever's closest to the element has the highest priority. So if you put it in line, highest priority. In the header, second. External, third. Which means you can override things, no problem. So it gives you all the benefits of not having to define your own style with being able to create your own styles right there. So the user style sheet here is external, and user style sheet is not linked to the page, so they are in the browser options actually. So actually this is basically saying if we don't specify the style and we have just plain text, whatever the browser is using will actually override the external style sheet. So when nothing is being used, the browser style sheet gets used. Once the browser style sheet, those are your preferences or your properties. And here's our user style sheets. So this is Internet Explorer. I don't know how up to date this is, but if you go into it, you can add a user style sheet to Internet Explorer by Internet Options. Let's take a look here actually. I have an old XP version here. If I bring up Internet Explorer and I go into Options, if I have a menu here, I don't have a menu, do I? Probably over here. Oh, no, here we go. Tools. Let's see if I can find it actually. You can set a style sheet actually in your, and you can actually use an external style sheet. In this particular screenshot, it's actually using a file that was created for your particular website or something. So I'm going into Tools and Internet Options and Content. Probably going to be under Content. Website. Maybe it's under General. I know there's a way of setting a style sheet, actually. Languages, accessibility. Let's take a look at Advanced, actually. Yep. Let's take a look in here, see what tabs. Looks like it's under the General tab, Accessibility. So let's see. General tag, Accessibility. Here it is. Format document using my style sheet. So you're obsessed with your style sheet, you like it so much, you've applied it to every document on your own particular website. Now you want to make all other websites out there in the world look like your website. So you take your document, you go into the Internet Options, you hit on the General tag, you hit on the bottom where it says Accessibility. You say ignore color, specifics, ignore all this stuff, ignore all that stuff, or use style sheet and specify the style sheet that you created that you love so much. And you can put it on every single page that you're looking at in your website. Which, I guess if you're that obsessed with your website, you might choose optionally. So let's see, we only have 5 slides left, so I'm going to continue with this, and then we'll be done for today. So I ended it on 9. It's like, the only problem with Windows is that you have to actually start this from the beginning again. But, so, I don't know too many users that apply their own style sheet to their web browsers, but the option's there and you can. The others are just some tidbits, some stuff. The last 5 slides of this lecture is going over some interesting tidbits as well that are related to style sheets. So here we have an example of the web page that uses the style sheet. So if you want to experiment with this, it's not a bad idea. The only problem is only you can see this because only your browser settings are set to your style sheet. But if you wanted to test out your style sheet, you could put in a different style sheet than what your website was using. Load it up in your web browser. It will override when there's no style. So if you're so you have to remove the style sheet on your test page. And then this is a great way of not having to keep uploading it to the website. You can test your style sheets out by loading up a blank page that doesn't use any type of style. If the page is using a style, and this is the biggest complaint that most users have, is they, oh, I put this style sheet in here, I changed all my preferences, but it doesn't show. Well, because everything else is going to overwrite it. And nobody produces a page that doesn't have style sheets on it. So here's an example here of changing relative information and then seeing it work. So the output is relative in terms of the size of the form with the page that's overwriting what you've put in your browser. So user style sheets, just to conclude the concept, using relative measurements. The output of the relative measurements is used by using the relative measurements. So it's relative to the text that's being displayed. So that is all you needed to know in terms of the application. So this is lecture number 6, and what this lecture was a recap or a review of all the things we looked at last week and from the beginning of the course. They had to do with applying the HTML tags. So next week, I believe we're going to start in with scripting. And we'll start looking at scripting languages, how it applies. And then we'll also have some more CSS examples as well. But that is all for today. Thank you, and see you next week. Next week is WASP visits, I believe.